Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Development Standards Committee. Special welcome to all members of the public who have attended this morning. This meeting is being recorded, but is also being broadcast live on the Angus Council YouTube channel. Can I remind all those joining us remotely to turn their microphones to mute unless they wish to speak, and they should do so by raising their hands remotely. Can I also remind members that under Standing Order 13, remote members attending hybrid meetings where quasi-judicial and regulatory matters are being considered must keep their cameras on to be permitted to take part in debate and voting. Right, we've got a couple of things on the agenda today, but we'll start off. Any apologies for absence, Fiona, please?
Yes, Convener, we've got apologies from Councillor Doran, Councillor Gavin Nicholl and Councillor Tommy Stewart. We've got Councillors Brays and Councillors Gall joining us remotely, and the rest of the members are in the chamber. Thank
you. Declarations of interest or statements of transparency from members this morning? Nothing. Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is on building warrants, and the committee is asked to note that during the period 4th of May to 31st of May this year, a total of 37 building warrants, 0 demolition warrants and 23 amendments to warrants have been approved with an estimated cost of £3,159,169. A copy of the approved warrants have been sent to every member. Is that noted? Thank you. Agenda item 4 on delegated decisions. Again, the committee is asked to note during the same period 43 applications have been approved and 1 refused under the Planning Acts through the scheme of delegation to officers. And again, a copy of this list has been sent to every member. Again, is that noted? Okay. Thank you. Agenda item 5 is the minute of our previous meeting held on the 14th of May, and it's submitted for approval as a correct record. Are there any comments or adjustments considered necessary to the minutes? If not, are the minutes approved? Thank you. As I say, we have 2 items on the agenda today as far as planning applications are concerned. Agenda item 6 relates to report 181/24, and the report deals with planning application number 23/00393/FULM for the construction of a solar farm, together with battery energy storage system, underground cable, substation buildings, new access and access tracks, security measures and associated infrastructure, and landscape and biodiversity enhancements at Cotton of Lowney, Hill End of Lowney and Forfar. And we'll start off, Mr Taylor, if you could present the slides, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, members. So, as you have alluded to, item 6 is a major planning application which relates to the construction of a 30 megawatt solar farm together with a 6 megawatt battery energy storage system with underground cable connecting to the north to a concrete block manufacturing plant. The application relates primarily to land adjacent to Cotton of Lowney by Kingsmuir Forfar. So the application contains 3 main components, and I'll just touch upon those briefly before giving a sort of policy context. Firstly, we have a proposal which would involve the formation of solar panels in 2 fields to the east and to the west of the B9128, which is the public road which connects Forfar in the northwest to Eastie in the southeast. The second aspect of the proposal relates to the formation of a cable route which would extend from the solar farm in the south in a northwesterly direction into Kingsmuir before turning east and north and then running along the east side of the disused railway line where it would connect into the lead aggregates concrete block manufacturing plant which sits to the north of Arbroath Road Forfar or the A932 in the approximate position of my cursor. The third aspect of the proposal relates to a 6 megawatt battery energy storage system. That particular part of the development would be located within the restored Octa Forfar quarry area in the approximate position of the red circle. So firstly, members are aware that the Local Development Plan and National Planning Framework 4 provides a supportive policy framework for renewable energy proposals, recognising that we are in a global climate and nature crisis. The policy framework allows for the development of this type of development on prime quality agricultural land, and land within the site equates to approximately 50 hectares of prime quality land, a mixture of grade 2 or class 2 and 3.1 land. So the proposal would provide for 36 megawatts of generating capacity, so 30 megawatts through the solar aspect of the proposal and a further 6 megawatts through the battery energy storage aspect. As I touched upon, the intention would be for the energy produced by development to supply a concrete block manufacturing plant, which is sited to the north of the A932. They have an ambition to be the first UK facility running from 100% renewable power, and the indication in the application is that this development would make a contribution towards that particular business achieving that particular aim. That is a significant benefit that should be identified early on in this assessment process. The development would offset in excess of 8,300 tonnes of carbon dioxide annually over the 40-year lifespan of development. So while the development plan policy framework is very much supportive for this type of proposal, I should identify at this stage that that development plan policy framework does not offer unqualified support for development of this nature. It requires landscape and visual impacts associated with development of this nature to be appropriately mitigated. This is an application which has attracted significant public interest. We have 287 objections to the proposal, and we have 3 community councils in whose area this development will be located: Forfar to the northwest, Inverarity to the southwest, and Letherman District to the east. All 3 of those community councils have objected to the application, identifying a number of concerns which are addressed in the report before members today. So firstly, I'll just touch upon the 3 aspects of the proposal, then I'll talk about a little bit more about the relevant issues on the table before us today. So firstly, the solar panel part of the proposal. This would be spread within 2 fields, either side of the B9128 public road. Firstly, we have an area on the left-hand side to the west known as Area B. That sits to the immediate south of the U518 public road. Panels within this area will be laid out on an east-west axis facing south. You can see on the right-hand side the elevation of the panels and a cross-section which shows that the panels will be driven into the ground, maximum height of 3 metres, and panels would occupy the majority of Area B, which is, as I say, the area identified by my cursor. Access to that area will be taken using an existing field access to the northwest, directly onto the U518 public road. Moving on to the area to the east, this is a larger area, so the area to the west is, I think, around 6 hectares. The area to the east measures 44 hectares in area. Access to that area will be taken from the public road on its west side. Within the site, there would be some apparatus formed close to the western boundary, so substation, inverter type structures and access track. There would be a construction laydown area to the northwest of that area, and panels would be laid out again, east-west axis, all facing south. Surrounding both areas would be security fencing measuring around 1.9 metres in height. Within that security fencing, mammal gates would be formed to allow small mammals to continue to forage within the application sites itself. Around the site, there would also be CCTV columns mounted on 3-metre high poles. They will be set at intervals around 50 to 80 metres around each of the site perimeter. The application involves fairly substantial new tree and hedge planting, and I'll touch upon a slide subsequently which identifies the applicant's landscape strategy, but that planting would take place in areas around the site and within it. It's also worth pointing out at this stage that during the life of the application, amendments have been made to the application. I have referred to Fields B or Area B to the left and Area C to the right. There was originally an Area A, which was located in the area that was an 8-hectare area. That area has been deleted by the applicant in an attempt to address concerns raised by officers. They've also increased the standoff area or the distance between the closest houses and panels in the field on the right-hand side, Area C. So we can see standoff areas have been introduced in various parts of the site where the panels are closest to housing. Moving on to the second aspect, the cable route. I don't need to say much about this because I've already touched upon the route, but it would go into Kingsmuir before turning east and running north along the east side of the railway line. In the bottom left-hand side, we have sections which show the nature of the cable route. So where it's in agricultural land, it would be buried to a depth of around 1.2 metres, so that land could continue to be ploughed. Where it runs on or adjacent to the public road to a depth of around ½ metre, 0.6 of a metre, as shown on the right-hand side. A bit more detail of the cable route is shown on the images on the right-hand side of the slide. So starting closer to the site at the bottom, running through Kingsmuir before running along the east side of the disused railway line, joining into the battery energy storage aspect on the west side of the disused railway line before going under the public Arbroath Road in Forfar and connecting up to the concrete plant to the north. There aren't considered to be any significant issues associated with the proposed cable route. There would obviously be some disruption during the formation of the cable route, but that is considered to be a short-term impact with no long-term residual impacts following completion of that particular aspect of the proposal. And the third and final aspect of the proposal is the battery energy storage system. The aerial photograph on the right-hand side shows its position within the sort of restored quarry area, Octaforfa. The battery energy storage area will be around about 300 metres to the south of the closest houses, which sit on the north side of Arbroath Road within Forfar. The layout of the compound would involve 2 battery energy storage containers, which are shown in elevation form at the bottom right-hand side, around 12.2 metres in length, around 2.4 metres in height off the ground, have the sort of general appearance of a steel shipping container. Within that compound, there would also be substation and other apparatus, car parking areas, and again, a security fence. But again, impacts associated with the battery storage aspect of the proposal are not considered to be unacceptable. There will be a reasonable separation to the closest residential properties. This is an undulating area of landform. There is trees and planting which would provide screening to it, and that aspect of the proposal is not considered to give rise to issues which couldn't be mitigated by suitable planning conditions, including those relating to the capture of any contaminated water in the event of sort of the fire brigade accessing the site in the event of an emergency situation. But what you can see is there is a reasonable separation between that part of the development and the closest housing. So concerns relating to safety and concerns which we consider couldn't be appropriately mitigated. So moving on to the issues which is identified in the papers before members. So we have 2 areas proposed for solar panel developments. And in considering the suitability of solar development, the Council has produced solar PV guidance on landscape capacity within different areas of Angus. This is an area which is identified as the Low Moorland Hills landscape character type, and within that landscape character type there are sub-areas which includes the Forfar Hills sub-area. And the guidance that's been produced suggests this is an area which has low capacity for solar PV development, and that relates to its open character and open landform, which consequently increases visibility of development and reduces capacity. Now, that is a strategic document, so there will be areas within the Forfar Hills which have greater or lesser capacity, and it still requires a sort of site-specific assessment. And in that regard, we have 2 areas proposed for solar PV panels, which both have very different characteristics and capacity for this type of development. Touching firstly on Area B, which is a 6-hectare area. This is a site which has a fairly robust landscape framework of field boundaries, trees and woodland. We have the property known as Kyleakin to the northeast, which has a wooded curtilage and also incorporates part of the disused railway line on its west side. There is significant planting within that curtilage, and the applicant proposes to augment that with additional new planting. Not shown on this OS extract is the line of trees which runs along the west side of Area B. Again, that contributes to providing a strong landscape framework for that particular part of development, and there is planting on or adjacent to the southern boundary of that area. So all of those features combine to ensure that area does have some capacity for solar PV development. On the other hand, Field C, Area C, located to the east, has different characteristics. It doesn't have those features which lend capacity to Area B. It is an area which is open and unenclosed. It is a sloping site which slopes down from north to south. There are open and obvious views of this particular area of land as a consequence of its landscape features. It has public roads on its north side, on its west side, and on its south side. And the sloping nature of the site means it is visible from higher ground, used for recreational purposes in the surrounding area, at a more than local context, so more distant from the application site itself. So both sites, both Area B, currently agricultural land, and the intention of the blue dots is to show the location of the closest residential properties. There are additional residential properties not identified by blue dots. The intention of this slide is simply to show the closest residential properties. So touching firstly again on Area B, you can see the landscape framework within the property known as Kyleakin, which extends down its east side. You can see planting to the south. You maybe can't particularly well see the tree line along the west side, but that's in this approximate position. There would be views of this part of development from the closest residential property. Kyleakin would have windows in its west elevation, around about 50 metres from the closest panels. The house known as Station House, located to the north, around about 100 metres from the closest panels. There will be significant impacts on those properties, particularly on completion of development, but those impacts individually would not be unacceptable, having regard to the landscape mitigation and the separation involved. Area C, as I touched upon, is not an area which has a landscape framework which provides capacity for this type of development. Number of houses with open views across that particular area of site. We have Glenlee to the northwest. We have Lowney Hill Cottage, which is located to the north, elevated above the site, and numerous other properties in the surrounding area. Mill Park to the south, open views across the site, which would experience prominent and significant adverse visual impacts associated with development. This slide is the applicant's landscape strategy. Apologies, the quality is not particularly clear, but what this shows is planting will be proposed along the northern boundary of Area B, southern boundary, and then areas along the eastern boundary. As I say, that is an area which has some capacity for solar PV. On the right-hand side, we have Area C, very little existing landscape features to accommodate development of this nature. The applicant intends to install sort of perimeter hedging around the site, tree planting at the northwest, areas along the northern boundary, along parts of the eastern boundary, and in the southeast corner. They have proposed planting in an attempt to avoid the visual amalgamation of the three large fields. However, officers aren't satisfied that that mitigation proposed would be particularly successful in avoiding the effect of visually amalgamating fields due to the sort of limited extent of the space and form of planting between panels. This slide is a zone of theoretical visibility. Members have seen this type of slide before. It is based on a bare earth analysis, so that doesn't take account of factors such as existing woodland planting, so it is a worst case type scenario. The red line application site is shown by the red line. The first dotted line is a 1 kilometre radius of the application site, and the second blue dotted line is a 3 kilometre radius. The areas shown in green are areas where visibility is predicted of the solar farm aspect, and the area shown in brown is where visibility is predicted of both solar farm and the battery energy storage system. But what this shows is there is fairly widespread visibility within 1 kilometre of the site, and beyond 1 kilometre of the site in a less localised area extending to and beyond the 3 kilometre radius. So this suggests there would be visibility on higher ground to the west around Balmashana, around Lure Hill to the southwest, and on the public road further to the south in the area around Lochlear. This is the Carnoustie Road in this approximate location. So the nature of surrounding land in the surrounding area to the north, to the west, to the south is elevated. The site is sloping, which increases its prominence and in turn reduces its capacity for this type of development. So I'll just show some photographs of the site and some of the applicants' photo montages submitted. Firstly, this deals with Area B, and I've talked about the established landscape framework that area has, which lends some capacity for solar PV development. This is woodland within the curtilage of the property known as Kyleakin on its east side. You can see the planting close to the southern site boundary and a line of trees along the western boundary. So that is an area which has some capacity for solar PV when considered against council guidance. Conversely, Area C does not have those attributes. This is taken from the public road, the B9128, so we are now at a position which is east of Kingsmuir, where the road veers to the right to go down the west side of the site towards Carnoustie, and this is the junction to the road that leads to Letham, which runs along the north side of the site. This is the property known as Glenlee. It has open views across the site, and panels are proposed in the area of field shown to the south of this property, shown in green. You can immediately see along this boundary very little by way of existing landscape framework, field boundaries. It's a very open and unenclosed area which reduces landscape capacity. Taken slightly further along the public road on the way to Letham, the C51, so this is just slightly further to the east on that route. In this area, the public road is elevated above the site. Panels will be proposed in the area of ploughed land on the right-hand side. And again, in the foreground, we can see very little means of enclosure of that field. There is open and unenclosed views of that field. There's no existing landscape framework really to accommodate development of that scale and nature. There will be prominent views across this land, and impacts will be significant and adverse in that location. This is taken again further along that road. This is taken just adjacent to the property known as Lowney Hill Cottage, which you can see at the bottom right-hand side. That is a property which is elevated high above the public road. So we'll look at the applicant's proposed mitigation in subsequent slides, but we're concerned that this mitigation as proposed in the application wouldn't be particularly successful in terms of addressing visual impacts from that property because it's elevated above the site, and the nature of the view is it would occupy a huge extent of the horizontal view of that property. So panels are proposed in the area of stub field beyond the power line here. So we can see again an open field boundary, no existing real means of enclosure along the public road or along the east side of the application site. Panels would be proposed in this area and in the ploughed area beyond. So I'll just flick between that last slide and this side so we can see the power line here. I'll just flip back again so you can see in context, this is the power line. So in this image, which is taken from the approximate position of the public road, which is reasonably representative of views from that property, there would be a significant extent of the horizontal field of view would be accommodated or occupied by panels. Panels would extend beyond to the right, to the west, and beyond to the east, to the left-hand side, that is shown in this image. Impacts on completion of development would be significant and adverse. The applicant has indicated in the bottom slide that once planting matures, this is after 10 years following completion, there will be some mitigation of impact. But as I've suggested, Lowney Hills Cottage in particular is elevated, and it's not considered that mitigation would be particularly successful in addressing visual impacts from that particular property. Moving to the east, this is taken adjacent to the village of Craigie. So at the top, we have the image on completion of development. We have the B9128 public road on the left-hand side. You can see in this image on completion, the panels would occupy several fields. We are concerned from this location, the development would result in the visual amalgamation of those fields, which is contrary to council guidance on solar PV development. At the bottom, we have an image with mitigation. Apologies, this isn't great quality, but it's intended to show a line of trees installed or planted, which would, this would be representative, according to the applicant, 10 years after completion of development. Officers believe that to be an optimistic representation of impact. I think when we look at the next slide, I should caution, when we look at visualizations of this nature, they do tend to give the impression of being further away from the development than you may experience when you're there, and this is more realistic of the type of view you experience from that location. So as you can see from this image, which is taken from Street View, you can see the fields which would be occupied by solar panels, so that the brown coloured field and the green coloured field beyond, and the effect of development, if I flip back, would be to visually amalgamate those fields. And we do not consider the mitigation proposed in the application will be successful in avoiding that impact. This is taken from the south of the site, from the property known as, or adjacent to the property known as Mill Park, which, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, has fairly open views across the site. In the slide above that, again, you can see very little by way of field boundaries to provide a landscape framework for this development. And then we look at the impact of full and completion of development. Again, the development would occupy a significant extent of the horizontal field of view. This is another impact that we consider to be significant and adverse. The slide below is the applicant's representation of mitigation following 10 years, which may provide some screening in the longer term, but in the short to medium term, impacts on property in that area would be significant and adverse. Moving back up to almost where we started, so this is the property, an open aspect to the south. When we look at the slide above that, the baseline position, the panels would occupy the area of Stubb Field, shown in the foreground. On completion of development, again, a significant extent of the horizontal field of view of that property would be occupied by panels. That is an impact at completion, which again will be significant and adverse. The image below shows development 10 years after completion. There would be mitigation at that point, but there would be a reasonably significant period where there would be significant and adverse impacts on that property and property generally in the surrounding area. From a more distant location, this is taken from the B9128 around Loughler. So this is just over 3 kilometres away from the application site. In the background, we can see Area C, as illustrated by the sort of light grey or light blue area here. There is also just about visibility of the area identified as Area B. So the development, again, from more distant areas remote from the site, a visible development in the landscape. And that is a consequence of the sloping nature of the site and the lack of existing landscape features, which disproportionately increases its prominence and ensures that impacts are likely to be more than just localised. The image below shows with mitigation, so you can maybe just see the line of trees which have been planted on the east side of the site. But again, from this location, officers are concerned that development would result in the visual amalgamation of fields, which is contrary to council guidance. This is a slightly more zoomed in version, and it's intended to give you an impression of development, but also bring to members' attention another development which was approved by committee, I think, in August last year. So we have Area C on the right-hand side. You can see Area B just off centre, and this is the approximate position, the solar farm, which is approved at Craignathrow, which is around 2 kilometres to the west of the site. The consequence of development in this application would be start to increase cumulative impacts of development in the surrounding area. This is an area with limited capacity for solar PV, and the application before us would start to increase the significance of cumulative impacts associated with solar PV development in this area. So just to summarise, this is an application which has attracted significant public interest. There are 2 letters of support and 287 letters of objection. Matters raised in support and in objection are addressed in the report before members. The application has also attracted objection from the 3 relevant community councils in this case. While the development plan provides significant support for renewable energy and carbon reduction proposals, and those benefits associated with this application will be significant, the support offered by the development plan for solar PV and associated renewable energy generation development is not unqualified. MPF4 places emphasis on ensuring the right development happens in the right place. This is an area where council guidance indicates there is low capacity for solar PV development, and the site, particularly Area C, displays characteristics which reduce its landscape capacity to accommodate this type of development. Officers do not consider the design and layout would provide appropriate mitigation to sufficiently address adverse impacts associated with the proposal. Impacts on houses are not individually unacceptable, but there would be a significant number of houses impacted for a period of time which is of material planning consequence. The application has been considered against relevant policies of the development plan. Regard has been given to material considerations. Officers consider the application to be contrary to the development plan due to unacceptable landscape and visual impacts by virtue of the location of the site and the absence of an established landscape framework. And on that basis, the application is recommended for refusal.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor, for the full report. That's really good. Thank you very much. Do members have any questions of Mr. Taylor at this point of the meeting? Councillor Duff.
Yes, thanks, Convener, and thanks to Mr. Taylor for the presentation. The applicant is the intention of the applicant to consume all the electricity in their concrete factory, and does that mean that there is no connection to the grid?
So the intention of the applicant is to use the electricity that would be generated by development, but there is a suggestion in the literature that any excess that wouldn't be used by the concrete block plant would be exported to the grid via the substation, I believe, at Lunan Head to the north of the concrete block plant.
Any other questions from members for Mr. Taylor? Don't see any hands. Okay. At this point, we have a number of speakers today. I'll just preempt that with Understanding Order 12 of Angus Council. Applicants, supporters and objectors are given the opportunity to address any points in which they wish the committee to take into account in coming to its decision today. Speakers will be given 5 minutes only each. I would remind speakers that members of this committee have already been provided with the opportunity to read all submissions and thus may already be familiar with most of the points that may be raised by speakers. So as I say, each speaker has 5 minutes. When we get to 4 minutes, I'll let you know you've got a minute left to sum up. We're starting with Ms. Hamilton, Pamela Hamilton. Okay, Ms. Hamilton, we're just going to make you, we're just going to take a minute or two of recess here because we have a problem with our cameras at the moment. So just sit back, relax. We're just going to try and reboot the system and see if it will pick up the cameras. Sorry, forget the one on. If you keep it on, and then the committee may have questions of you or any other member of the public after you've spoken, okay? So I will give you a minute's warning before conclusion. Okay. Off you go, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address this committee. I am one of the residents who will be impacted by this development. I am speaking today not only for myself, but for the many in our community who have, for the past 2 years, had our lives negatively impacted by this proposed industrial power plant. This has caused much stress and anxiety, and in my own case has led to a steep learning curve in planning law, policies and procedures, and networking to attain more knowledge about renewable energy, and in particular solar, over countless hours. I feel I should stress at this point that we are not opposed to renewable energy. However, industrial developments such as this must be sited appropriately. It has been proven that this is not the case here. The alternative site assessment appeared to be presented in such a way that other sites were dismissed lightly in favour of the Lowney site, which obviously held the greatest financial return. It will be explained later that the 3-kilometre cable distance is purely profit-driven, which is also finally admitted in the summary of public comments and applicant responses document, question 43 from March 2024. So, not technically essential. As a grandmother, it makes me deeply concerned for my grandchildren's futures that our finite best quality land is being continually targeted by developers of solar, wind, battery and pylons and biofuels to the detriment of Scotland's food security, which is also of great concern to our First Minister, as my neighbour Mr Beaton will explain. Italy has already banned the use of prime land for solar development. As a community, we have opposed this ill-conceived development twice, following the changes made by the developers in March of this year, some 9 months following submission of the full planning application. In NPF 4, cross-cutting outcome and policy links, a fair and inclusive planning system, engagement in development planning states, such engagement undertaken in line with statutory requirements should be early, collaborative, meaningful and proportionate. This has not been the case here. At the consultations, there were no answers to some important questions, and often there was a different answer to the same question, depending on which Wardle Armstrong representative was answering it. In application documents, it is stated in several places that the effect of this development would be moderate, strong or severe adverse. But as the effects would be localised, it was deemed acceptable to turn a productive rural environment into an industrial power plant, affecting the local community and visitors to the area. Calling it a solar farm does not make it fit into a rural environment. I would like to ask the councillors to be guided by the recommendation made by Mr Taylor and refuse this application. And finally, I wish to thank Forfar, Inverarity and Letham Community Councils for supporting our objections, Mr Taylor for his diligence, and the many people, local and further afield, who have lent their advice and support to help us to spare Lowney. Thank you.
Hamilton. Do members have any questions of Ms Hamilton? No, you're off the hook, Ms Hamilton. There you are. Thank you very much. I now have Mr Russell Beaton. So I won't repeat all of that, Mr Beaton. You got all of that, so I'll give you a minute's notice if you get near your time, okay?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So, my name is Russell Beaton, and I am a local resident directly affected by this planning application. So decisions must be made on compliance or non-compliance with NPF 4 and indeed the Angus Local Development Plan. So I want to thank the planning officer for the due diligence shown and his recommendation to refuse based on non-compliance. I also draw your attention to a recent letter that was sent to John Swinney regarding solar energy and prime agricultural land, and his response, which I hope resonates with you all. And I quote, "We are particularly encouraged by your remarks during the parliamentary meeting on the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Bill held on Wednesday, March 27, 2024, where Mr Swinney quoted, the global issues that are now having an effect on food security create an imperative for us to strengthen our approach to maximising our food production here at home. I appeal to the government, as it wrestles with these key questions, to act in its planning system to preserve as much prime agricultural land as possible for the utilisation of prime agricultural purposes, and to place less emphasis on providing planning consent on solar farms that take a significant amount of prime agricultural land out of production and put the money into the hands of some already wealthy farmers." Quote, unquote. These are the words of the First Minister. The committee not only has an objective decision-making obligation, it also has, I believe, a moral obligation to make the right decision based on the facts before you and the impacts your decisions may or may not have on the community and or communities directly affected. I ask you fully consider the cumulative impacts regards multiple solar approvals, loss of prime agricultural land, impacting the fundamental ability to feed ourselves. This is also exacerbated by battery energy storage schemes which go hand in hand with solar, in addition to the threat of the monster pylons, which you've all heard of. So within Angus, there are already Padnarum, Pressick, the Gind, Kinblethman, Parkhill, and multiple other such applications and approvals in process. It's also clear that the application is fundamentally flawed from a technical perspective, if its sole reason for doing so is to provide so-called green power to a concrete block factory. The technical submission does not add up, based on the application content from the objection raised by Professor Peter Dobson, OBE, from Oxford University. Whilst admirable in its intent, it's not fully supported with the appropriate science. In today's world, we are supposed to follow the science. Another key issue facing the community is the significant loss of visual amenity, which in our decision to live in a rural environment, which I've done for the last 20 years, we certainly didn't envisage being neighbours to an industrial-sized power generation plant to serve the needs of just one local business with absolutely no benefit whatsoever or tangible benefit to the local community. Now, 5 minutes is not long to express oneself or the feelings of the community that are impacted by your decision-making. But please recognise the shadow that's been over all of us for the last 2 or so years, the time and energy that's been given into researching objective response to the planning application, and our utter dismay at the tick-box effort from the developer to meet their obligations with regard, or in this case, utter disregard for those affected. I appeal to you all to support the planning officer's recommendation of refusal. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Beaton. Again, I'll just ask the members again if they've got any questions for Mr. Beaton. That's fine. No, thanks, Mr. Beaton, much. The next speaker is Ms. Valerie Orr. Welcome, Ms. Orr. So again, same goes for yourself, but I'll let you just head on.
Dear members of the committee, I stand here today urging you to refuse the Lowney Solar Farm application as recommended by the Planning Officer's report. The report clearly determines that this application does not meet policy requirements and visual impact grounds. However, I am not here to discuss policy. Instead, I am here to highlight some of what may consider material objections to this application. They may be classed as material in regards to planning policy, but to me, my family and my business, they are the most concerning issues of them all. I am a farmer alongside my partner and our 2 young boys and neighbours to the proposed development. We are new entrants, settling here in Angus to produce beef, to produce local food for local people, and it's far from easy. Our biggest challenge is access to land. We rely on seasonal lets, renting land for 6 months at a time to feed our stock. I think we can all agree there is not much nutritional value in a solar panel. The further loss of food producing land compounds the competition for land, driving up land rents, driving up the cost of production and driving up food prices. This is at odds with the Angus food growing strategy of 2020 to 2025. This is not theory. This is what we as new entrant young farmers are experiencing right now as a severe barrier to viable farming in the area. In 40 years' time, when this development is proposed to be decommissioned, what will be left for our children to deal with? A Welsh Government report in 2023 on the impact of solar PV sites in agricultural soils and land quality concluded that PV on high-grade land, grades 1, 2 and 3A, could lead to compaction, leading to reduced permeability and increased surface runoff and erosion, which is likely to lead to the loss of high-grade agricultural land after decommission. The County of Angus has some of the highest quality land in the UK for producing food. Turning over to PV for 40 years is irresponsible and damaging to Scotland's ability to produce the food it needs. On road safety, road service may have had no objection in the report. However, I do wonder how many travel the area on a daily basis. As a parent travelling the B9128 and C51 daily with my children to Lethem Primary School, it is frightening to think of the increased risk to road users along the stretch, in particular by Blarney Quarry. This is narrow and twisty with regular accidents, in particular with large vehicles. Motorists rely on being able to see oncoming traffic by sightlines across the corner. The proposed screening and fencing will greatly impact on sightlines along this stretch and the ability to see large oncoming vehicles at these corners. The developers also state the glint for the panels to road users is possible. Is this really worth the risk to road users? The primary purpose of this application is to generate energy for Laird's, but there's nothing in the document supplied that details that this project is adequately engineered for this purpose. The question, although asked before, has not been answered. What is the power requirement for Laird's? Is up to 30 megawatts really required? And if not, then why is this project so vast and also not sited closer to where it is to be used? The project has already been reduced without any apparent effect on the 30 megawatt target, which feels like a deliberate move to mislead on the purpose of the proposed outcomes of the development, implicating that this is not a fair or just proposal. Of course, this is not the only solar project in the area. Sooty-side, Carscarney, Paradnarum, Pressick and the closest creek, Nathro, which was approved as there were no other solar developments within 5 kilometres. And as highlighted in the Planning Officer's report, the cumulative impact on the surrounding area will be detrimental to our visual amenity. But not only that, as more and more solar farms get approved, we have further industrialisation of our countryside, loss of visual amenity, loss of prime agricultural land, making our road network more dangerous, the potential telecom interference and flood risks. This proposed development is not suitable for this site and therefore should be refused.
Thanks very much, Ms Orr. Again, any questions for the Speaker? Thanks very much, Ms Orr. Thank you. Okay, our fourth speaker is Mr Callum Wilson.
Good morning, committee. I am Callum Wilson, a mechanical engineer.
Mr Wilson, could I just ask you to move the microphones, the actual stand of the microphone towards you? That's better, thank you. Just so
Okay.
I'll pick you up there.
Start again. Good morning, committee. I am Callum Wilson, a mechanical engineer who lives in Kingsmuir, next to the proposed cable route. I am not opposed to solar energy, but must be of appropriate scale in the correct location. I have posted many questions and comments on several subjects on this application, but time constraints limit me to talking about the flawed site selection process, the cable routing and the scale of the project. The document justifying the selection of Lowney contains many questionable statements. The best premise in the selection document is the solar plant has to be within 3 kilometres of the best location. This was originally stated as being for technical reasons, but it was finally conceded as being economic by the developer. To be clear, the voltage drop can be mitigated by increasing the voltage or the cable cross-section. The economic impact of the length of the cable will be clearly related to the difficulty and hence expense of the selected route. The selected site's cable route includes approximately 1 kilometre section along Dunwich Road, which one may surmise will be expensive. 5 sites were examined inside the artificial 3 kilometre radius. Some of the questionable statements made regarding the site selection include: Site 1 to the east of Forfar Golf Course was discounted on several grounds, including having high quality farmland, despite it being the worst of the 5 sites examined. Also listed was the possible harm to off-site listed buildings. The site is the closest to the best, so offers the shortest cable route. I noted that the planning recommendation has questioned the rationale of this site's rejection. In the scouting sites 3 and 4, access problems were cited. This is despite the same access road being proposed as is going to be used for the approved Craignathrow scheme. Also cited for site 3 was the 2.2 kilometre distance to the grid connection. The length of cable route of the selected site is actually longer. Again, land quality was cited, again worse than the selected site. Amongst the reasons for rejection of Site 2 was possible harm to off-site monuments, and again the quality of the land, again worse than the selected site. It is noted that landowner agreement is only mentioned for the selected site. It is good practice to give the status of all the selection criteria for all the options. Moving on to the underground cable that goes through Kingsmuir. It is not known if it is under the road, the grass verge on the south, or the paved verge on the north. If the cable goes on either verge, there will be substantial impact to the services to the adjacent properties which cross the verges at relatively shallow depths. The south verge width between my house wall and the kerb is 2.8 metres. If the cable is located in this area, I have concerns regarding the stability of my foundations due to both the Trent excavation and also the substantial soil heating resulting from the cable. The duration of the cable works along the road has been estimated as 3 weeks. Recent cable works to the east of Kingsmuir and at Welton Corner both took several weeks to fulfil 50-metre sections. One of the contractors put this down to the road being laid on rebarred reinforced concrete. He was highly amused by the claim that 1 kilometre could be done in 3 weeks. I would also question the scale of the development. The power requirements of Layers have never been disclosed. The 6 megawatt BESS would suggest that Layers power requirement, the main justification for this project, is considerably less than 30 megawatts.
You've just got 1 more minute now. 1 more minute left.
Right, I'm about finished. If this is the case, a smaller scale scheme, more local to Layers, may be appropriate. This may possibly use some of their brownfield sites which were discounted in a single paragraph. In summary, definitely the wrong location and possibly the wrong scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any questions from members for Mr. Wilson this morning? Nope. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for your time. Thank you. And the last one we have is Brenda Shanks. She's here. Good morning, Ms. Shanks. Thank you very much. I say you've got 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you're 4 minutes in, okay?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Good morning, committee. My name is Brenda Shanks. I lived in Lowney for 31 years before age and ill health forced my removal to Forfar earlier this year. I have 3 comments today further to the long and numerous objections are lodged with planning that are among your briefing papers. First, a little information. Paragraph 8.26 of the Planning Officer's report says, quote, in general terms, the occupants would continue to enjoy a high standard of visual amenity, unquote. This refers to a number of properties adjacent to Area C, including where I lived. The house I lived in had 10 rooms or areas for public use, not counting bathrooms. Of these, 7, 3 of 4 bedrooms, the formal dining room, the office, the library and craft areas would be directly overlooked by the industrial power plant. By my understanding of the ordinary use of the English language, that does not indicate a high standard of visual amenity. The report also appears to rely on its reference to, quote, landscape features, unquote. These can only mean the trees. In the case of the house where I lived, mostly elderly conifers, most of which are due for felling within the next 5 to 10 years. The National Geographic Society defines landscape as, quote, geographic features of the area, unquote. I don't think garden trees count as geographic features. They're certainly more temporary than the proposed industrial plant. I now come to the point of amenity in the Launay area. Launay only has two amenities, really, a main road and the bus service. There are no shops, school, pavements, street lights, mains gas, or fast broadband. Most inhabitants have to use expensive satellite or dongles or do without the internet. Most have septic tanks. The valued amenity of Launay is entirely its rural agricultural nature as bounded by the undeveloped, biodiverse Lure, Launay and Dunnican Hills. This proposal would destroy that amenity forever. My main written objections demonstrate clearly that this industrial plant is most unlikely ever to be safely or economically dismantled or restored to agricultural use on the land. Finally, I come to cumulative impact. Very recently, my husband and I drove 1,260 miles. We went down the west of England over several days to Surrey and Kent, then back over several days up the east of England. We used A and B roads to avoid smart motorways. Total journey time was about 7 days. At England, we saw not one wind farm. We saw one, just one solar farm in the Cambridgeshire, Lincolnshire area. I wasn't sure where the border was. In over 1,000 miles. Here in Angus, if this industrial plant gains your approval, I would only have to travel 18 miles for half an hour and see 4 such plants: Padanaram, Suttyside, Launay, and one on the outskirts of Arbroath from Carmiley. How's that for cumulative impact? Must Angus become the industrial power generation site for everybody else, including England? Because if not, you can only reject this ill-conceived application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms Shanks. Any questions for the Speaker again? No, Ms Shanks, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We have a written statement to be read out on behalf of Forfar Community Council, and I'm going to ask Ms Anderson to read that out to committee.
The Royal Borough of Forfar Community Council convey their apologies to personally address the committee. We thank all members of the public who attended our meetings or conveyed their concerns by other means. We agree with the recommendation to refuse in Report 181/24 that validates the real concerns of the communities against the Angus Local Development and National Planning Framework 4, as presented admirably by the Planning Division. Communities are the stakeholders of Angus and invest in their areas for the betterment of the wider public and the future generations in a balanced approach. We conclude this representation and request members to uphold the refusal as recommended. That's from Eleanor Feltham, the planning contact for Forfar Community Council.
Thanks, Fiona. Okay, we also have with us today Mr Neil Sutherland, who is here on behalf of the applicant. I think he has a couple of members of staff on behalf of the applicant. If you wish, again, you can just come around and speak here. And Mr Sutherland, again, you have 5 minutes again, and I'll give you a minute's notice, and then again there may be questions from members for you as well. So I'll let you begin.
Thank you. Firstly, apologies, I've got a cold, so I'll try not to cough. Firstly, I'd like to say, well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. We would say it's a very thorough planning assessment report. We obviously had a good read of that. We agree that this is about the weighting that should be attributed to the benefits of the proposed solar farm and the disbenefits, and to weigh that up as to what the overall impact is. And the weighting is the thing that we obviously strongly disagree with in terms of the officer's report. I would like to commend the speakers, the public, the members of the public. We understand it's not easy for them to come up and speak to things like this, so we totally agree with the ability for people to speak, and they're obviously very heartfelt views. We also sympathise with being a councillor. I'm glad I'm not a councillor and have to sit and weigh up where you've got very heartfelt feelings against policy, which is very clear. We're not monsters. We have tried hard to work with the council. We have listened to the community. We understand there's always going to be objections and people that are never going to agree with us. But we have tried what we can to try and make this an acceptable proposal. We significantly reduced the footprint of the proposal by removing one field, as Ed said, and reduced the solar panels by 20%. That's a significant decrease in the overall size. That's not been done because we don't care about the impacts. We do. We're trying to make this fit. We're trying to make this work. We have increased the standoff from houses, and we have also introduced additional hedge planting within the site to help reinstate historic field patterns. And we're a little bit miffed that that's been discounted by Ed earlier on, in saying that that had no consequence when it's something we discussed and we agreed would be a good idea. But the point being, these changes demonstrate that we've listened to the feedback. We've done what we can to try and make this an acceptable proposal. I have to go back to basics and remind everybody there's a climate emergency and an energy security crisis ongoing, and we have to address it. We can't ignore it. It's all down to the weight, as I said earlier, about what is given to policy and what the impacts are going to be. In our opinion, MPF4 clearly states that proposals to retrofit measures to existing developments that reduce emissions or support adaptation to climate change will be supported. We do not consider that the report gives due weight to the provision of that. It's something that's very difficult to decarbonise, and this will be the first to try and do that. So this is something you have to bear in mind when you've got the unenviable task of weighing this up. MPF 4 11 Part E2 states where landscape impacts are localised and/or appropriate design mitigation has been applied, they will generally be considered to be acceptable. I think a lot of today's debate and discussion has been about landscape impact, and that's something that you'll have to wrestle with. I just bear in mind, just draw your attention back to that key part of MPF 4 when you're doing that. We also don't consider that the report gives due weight to the effectiveness of landscape planting being provided, and I think I take point that the assertion earlier that the ZTV is a theoretical ZTV. That's theoretical, it's not actual, and a lot of the distant views you simply would not see. It comes down to, I think, the definition of what is local. In our view, it's quite clear that the impacts, there are impacts, it's impossible to do this without impacts, but the impacts would be local. One thing we could do, if it helps, and if the council were minded to grant a consent, we'd be happy for a planning condition that, for example, said that the boundary planting was implemented now, a year in advance of any development taking place, to allow that to establish further. I would say that the photomontages that have been done are done to industry standard. They're in no way deficient. It's exactly the same process that you would have at an inquiry or any public hearing. It's a well-established industry standard, and that's what's been followed to the letter. So I can assure you that they are accurate.
We've still only got another 1 minute.
Okay. That's pretty much done anyway. The application needs to be considered against all policies in MPF4 in the local plan. We are asserting that we're not asserting that MPF4 allows any development in any location. However, by virtue of the clear benefits that energy brings to the environment, energy security, the decarbonisation of the concrete plant, the existing extensive screen planting, and the ecological benefits that will bring, and the lack of landscape impact beyond the local area, we respectfully request that the application be approved. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Sutherland. Do members have any questions for Mr Sutherland? Just be with it. If you keep your microphone on, Mr Sutherland, that's for that. Councillor Durno first.
Thanks, Mr Sutherland. I'm usually a great solar panel fan. The question I have to ask is, I drive from Arbroath to Forfar every time I come up here, and I do pass quite a lot of moorland, wasteland, up in the hills where there's no houses, there's nothing, there's no trees, nothing seems to grow there. Why did you decide to use this site in particular and not go for a site that's maybe more hidden or on land that can't be used? What specifically made you go for this site in question?
The applicant might want to come in on this, but fundamentally, the reason being it's what a land is made available. You have to have a willing landowner is the first thing. And then the second key thing in any site is you have to have access to an available grid connection. And that's the thing that drives any renewable development. It all centres on that. That's your starting point. It's like the equivalent would be a sand and gravel quarry. You can only quarry where the sand and gravel is. The same goes for renewable development. It's because of cost. And the cost of cable routing, it becomes less efficient the further it is and expensive. And there's no funding for these developments. These are self-funded developments, so it has to be commercially viable. And they're the main two drivers. Unless you wanted to add anything in.
No, I think you covered everything there.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark's next.
Thanks very much, and good morning, colleagues, and good morning. Really, there's a couple of areas that I kind of want to ask you about, if you don't mind. And on the other side of this, really, this whole big venture, and it's not my first rodeo at this, you know. But I would like to ask you about decommissioning, bonds, etc. So if you could answer that first, please. And then, as a keen walker, I want to talk to you about tracks, access tracks. Okay? Thanks.
So it was standard practice. We deal with a lot of applications in my profession for solar farms, and a lot of councils will ask for a bond for restoration, and that's totally fine. So that's something that can be provided. It's normally a Section 75 legal agreement that there's a bond put in place for the restoration, so that there's a guarantee no matter what happens to the applicant, whether they remain solvent or not, there's a guarantee there that the council has access to funds to restore the site. The other thing that's worth mentioning quickly is they're not difficult to take away. It's not like a quarry or the old coal mines of the past and the huge legacy that they left. They literally are pulled out of the ground, the cable's taken away. All of the assets have a value because the metal, the valuable, and therefore it's highly likely, I can't demonstrate it as now because the industry hasn't got to the point where they're being decommissioned, but there's value in that, so it's self-evident that there's a demand for that equipment to be recycled and taken away. But all that aside, even if there's nil cost in it, there would be a bond there to pay for the entirety of the removal of the sites back to agricultural land. And sorry, walking, did you want to say walking?
Yes, please.
Councillor Clark, Mike.
I've seen people, developers, just mentioning access tracks. There's nothing to say that people can't develop tracks, but you must produce other tracks which are as good, if not better. So, really, just your comments.
Well, I too am a keen walker, and we're keen, and I always encourage our applicants to look at pedestrian routes where there are. My understanding is that there are no pedestrian routes on the site. We were looking at whether we could add some in, but it would have been a path to no other path network, so we didn't feel that was valuable or useful in this instance. It's not been anything I've heard the objectors mention today either. The other difficulty, the practical difficulty, is if you have a track through the middle, this is electrical equipment, and you can't let people, obviously for obvious reasons, into that site. So you end up having a corridor through a site, which becomes difficult, and I'm not sure how attractive that would be as a walk. But if there's a clear desire line from one place to another, then that is something we have put in other schemes. So it's absolutely doable where there's a sensible, point-to-point connection that could be added.
just as a supplementary, I suppose, I really kind of wanted you to explain that in generic terms, really, because obviously there's not a particular one straight through, but it is important. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Councillor Melville.
Thank you, Convener. Excuse me, and thank you for the presentation. I wonder if you could just set out in fairly simple terms what the tangible benefit of this application would be to the local community.
The tangible benefit is a reduction in CO2. That helps everybody. The other tangible benefits are employment at the concrete plant. This will help safeguard that and decarbonise them. So there's a number of direct and indirect tangible benefits there. To my knowledge, though, the planning policy doesn't require a direct benefit. It simply does the planning application meet policy or not.
Thank you.
Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener, and thanks for your presentation, Mr. Sutherland. I've got a couple of questions, but perhaps more directed at the applicant rather than you're the agent, yes. I mean, and sort of following on from Councillor Melville's question, it's a concrete plant, which is an industrial plant in my thinking, on the edge of Forfar. This development, the solar farm supplying your own electricity, will obviously make the plant more resilient because if electricity prices go up, you're going to be buffered that way. What sort of factor is that for you? I mean, what percentage of your operating costs are electricity at the moment? Just to give us a feel for how additionally secure this development might make your plan and the jobs that depend on it.
Yeah, we've got a power purchase agreement with Laird's Aggregates already, and the rate that we've agreed within there is probably a third of what they will pay on the market. So they'll take direct power generators and they'll probably save 2/3 on what they currently spend on their electricity supply.
And presumably the electricity price they will pay. You're generating the electricity and selling it to Laird's. Is that correct?
Yeah, we generate electricity. I think there's just over about 40% that currently go into Laird's or will go into Laird's. Laird's are looking to upgrade their equipment to be more electricity dependent with a view to take more electricity from the solar side. Any surplus, as was said before, goes out into Lunenhead. And the battery allows them to continue to operate overnight because the batteries will be charged over the day and they don't discharge into Lunenhead, they'll just discharge into the factory.
And the excess electricity will go to the substation at Lunenhead. Yeah, I think I understand the picture now. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Any other questions for the applicant from members? No, thanks, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Take your seats again. With questions over, we'll move to comments from elected members. We'll start with Councillor Melville.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. And as a matter of record, as my fellow members of the committee will know, in the past I've been very supportive of developments, renewable developments such as this one. In line with NPF 4, I do also have great concern about the unfolding climate catastrophe and doing what we can to tackle it. However, NPF 4 is, as we've heard, also about making sure that the correct development is in the correct place. And in this case, I don't think this is the correct location for this development. We've heard about the policy contraventions of both NPF 4 and our local development plan, and I want to agree with the officers on their characterisation of that. However, I also want to touch on 2 points raised by the objectors and also the answer to the question that I asked. Firstly, on road safety, I am concerned that some of the proposed screening being put in place would reduce the sightlines approaching Cotton of Lowney from Muirdrum. That's the road that I came here today on. I don't do it every day, but I use it often enough, and I am concerned that it would increase the potential for accidents there. I'm also entirely unconvinced about community benefit. Now, while I appreciate that's not a material planning consideration, achieving a just transition means we need to take communities with us, and we need to ensure that meeting the challenge of climate change actually benefits local communities, whether they be urban or rural. And to my mind, that's not the case here. So I will not be supporting this application.
Thanks, Councillor Melville. Councillor Beattie.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Councillor Melville here. This committee is fully aware of the climate emergency, and we've approved numerous renewable energy generation and battery storage facilities across Angus. But our officers have demonstrated that if approved, this development will deliver prominent, significant adverse effects on the amenity. So clearly this development doesn't meet the criteria of right development in the right place, and therefore I'm content to follow the officers' recommendations and refuse the application.
Thanks, Councillor Beattie. Councillor Clark.
Yes, as a local member, I too would echo my colleagues' sentiment and other people mentioning the dire straits we're in with climate change. And I think our NPF 4 certainly helps us along to make better choices. And I might make a better choice, a different choice again, but today, overwhelmingly, I'm going with the recommendation of the planners, the officers, because fundamentally, I just do not see any benefit. I know that's not material. We've tried to stay away from that. But insofar as this particular one is concerned, there's just too much against it. It's not in the right place. It's not the right application for me. It's not the right planning application. It's definitely not in the right place. And there are safety issues, as Councillor Melville's mentioned. There are safety. And just to say that you're mitigating by, again, I mentioned it earlier, I've done a lot of these in the past, and so far as having hedging and planting as bunds, etc., that's fine. But these roads, these are rural roads, and there are already problems. So, no, I would certainly be backing up my colleagues and planning colleagues for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor McLaren.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'm very supportive of renewable energy produced by solar panels, but on this occasion, I agree with the planning officers. The proposed development is contrary to policies 11, 14 and 29 of the NPF 4 and policies DS1, DS3, PV6 and PV9 of the Angus Local Development Plan, as it would give rise to an acceptable landscape and visual impact by virtue of its location. Therefore, I cannot support this application.
Thanks, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm not going to say much more than what my colleagues have already said. Councillor Melville touched it, hit the nail on the head for me. We have to take the communities with us, and on this one we certainly have not got the communities with us. This is on prime agricultural ground, and we've gone on about that in the past. It's in the wrong place, and therefore I'm going to support the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fotheringham. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Well, I'm going to take a different view here, and I think Mr Sutherland mentioned balance, and I think planning is often about balance. I've looked at NPF 4, I've got it here. I've printed off a copy, very useful when you're chairing DMRC. I would say that policies 1, 8, 11, 18, 25 and 26 of NPF 4 could be used to support this application. We have declared a climate emergency several years ago. This development will provide off-grid electricity to a local business and employer, and that increases their resilience against price increases. And Councillor Melville asked about the concrete benefits, no pun intended, that the jobs employed in that factory would be benefits as well as the climate change benefits. So I'm supportive of it. It's a balance. It may not be perfect. The issue about prime agricultural land, I have on numerous occasions said that we need clear direction from government on that one, which we haven't had. And as a compensation for that, Mr Hunter and his colleagues have provided quite good information about the percentage of prime agricultural land that is devoted to renewable energy. And from memory, that's now sitting about 1%. Well, at 1%, that doesn't give me any concern. If it was 5 or 10%, I would start to get worried that we're using up too much prime agricultural land for renewable energy. But I think at 1%, I would be quite comfortable. So yes, I am supportive of this application and would be quite happy to move an amendment if I had a seconder.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Councillor Braze.
Yes, thanks, Convener, and thanks to everyone who's given a presentation today. Really useful. Over the years, I've seen quite a lot of applications coming in, and sometimes I've supported them and sometimes I've not. Sometimes I've gone with officers' recommendations and sometimes not, because it is, in my mind, a question of balance. Now, this application, I think there's an awful lot of merit in it in many regards. The fact that it's going to take all that carbon out of the equation, I think, is a very strong factor. And when it comes to this idea, as Councillor Duff has said, 1% so far under solar farms. Well, if you compare that to the amount of land in Angus that is used for the production of alcohol for export around the world, you know, it's massively insignificant compared to that. So when it comes to food security, I have no problems whatsoever with land being used for solar farms. Very content that land can be restored very successfully in 40 years' time. Really quite a simple matter. So I've got all that going for this application. But the question is, for me, is it the right place? Is that particular block of land the right place to put solar farm of that scale? And on that point, I would agree with the officers that it is not. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Councillor Braze. Is there any other comments? Nope. See no more on the screen. Okay, it falls to me as convener just to sum up on this one. So to sum up, I think we should recognise that development plan and national policies provide strong support for proposals that provide for the generation of renewable energy, including energy storage, and NPF4 requires significant weight to be attached to the global climate and nature crisis when considering proposals. In this case, there are elements of the proposal such as battery storage in a former quarry and the provision of an underground cable from the solar farm to the manufacturing plant that would be unlikely to give rise to unacceptable impact. However, the solar farm itself comprises two separate and distinct parcels of land located in an area where council policy guidance suggests capacity for solar development is low. One area of land, I think it was area B, might generally be acceptable for solar development given its landscape characteristics, but the other area is generally open in character and development would be widely visible. While it's possible that development might be acceptable in that area, it would require a high degree of mitigation, and requisite mitigation is not proposed by this application. The resultant development would cause significant and adverse landscape change, and it would be widely visible, giving rise to more than localised impact, in my opinion. There is a substantial number of objections recorded which identify concerns regarding landscape and visual impact as the main cause. The mitigation proposed would generally only provide benefit towards the latter stages of the consented period. The proposal does not give rise to significant policy issues in relation to other matters, however, and site-specific issues could be addressed by planning conditions. There is a favourable policy environment towards renewable energy generation proposals, and this proposal would help address the climate crisis. However, that support is not unqualified, and it doesn't mean that any or all proposals in any or all locations should be supported. The focus of NPF4, as we've heard from members today, remains achieving the right development in the right place. In addition, the proposal is located on prime quality agricultural lands, as we've heard. And interestingly, while policy allows proposals for renewable energy development on prime quality agricultural land, Scottish ministers have issued a recall direction in relation to an appeal relating to solar development on prime agricultural land elsewhere. This in view of the potential cumulative impacts with other developments and in view of the long-term strategic importance of such land for national food security. As such, this policy, I believe, subject to further scrutiny by Scottish ministers. Can I thank everybody for their contributions today, all the speakers and other members of the public and members for their eloquent considerations. On balance, I believe the proposal does not comply with development plan policy due to the significant and adverse landscape and visual impacts it would cause. This is an area with low landscape capacity to development of this nature, and the development has not been designed to ensure impacts are localised and/or appropriate design mitigation has been applied. In these circumstances, the planning balance does not support the grant of planning permission, and as such, I'm going to move refusal on the basis that the application is contrary to development plan policies DS1, development boundaries and priorities, DS3, design quality and placemaking, DS4, amenity, PV6, development in the landscape, and PV20, soils and geodiversity, and international policies, Policy 4, natural places, Policy 5, soils, Policy 14, design quality and place, and Policy 29, rural development. Do I have a seconder? I'm going to take Councillor McLaren on that one. Thank you for that. Councillor Duff, do you have an amendment?
Yes, Convener, I have an amendment. I think for the sake of democracy, it's quite healthy to put an amendment up. My amendment is we approve it because it, in my view, complies with NPF4 policies 1, 8, 11, 18, 25 and 26. I don't know if I'm a seconder, but I'm certainly willing to move the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duff. Do you have a seconder? Okay, afraid not on this occasion, Councillor Duff. I'm going to remove from my objection to this, I'm going to remove PV20 from my, so it's still DS1, DS3, DS4, PV6, and the remaining national policies I've already mentioned. In that case, the planning application is refused. Thank you everyone for your time today. We'll move on. I think we'll take a recess here, members, for 10 minutes just to allow comfort break. Thank you.
John, would you stop the live stream, please?
Okay. Right, we'll just, good morning again. We'll just continue from that recess. Agenda item 7 today relates to report 182/24 and deals with planning application 24/00143 full by Forfar Stingers Para Football Club for the siting of a storage container at the recreation ground in Graham Crescent, Forfar. There's a very short presentation, but I'll ask Ms Taylor to do the 2 or 3 slides. Thank you.
Thanks again, Convener. So item 7, as you have suggested, is a planning application for the siting of a storage container on land at the recreation ground at Graham Crescent in Forfar. So the proposed storage container will be located on the west side of the recreation ground. The recreation ground comprises a equipped play area on its east side, a small sports football type pitch in the central area, and an open area of grass on the west side in the approximate position of the proposed container. The application site itself is adjacent to the cricket ground, and the proposed storage container will be seen against the back of the main pavilion at the cricket ground. In terms of neighbouring receptors, we have Lochbank House to the north, which is a care home. There is a line of trees which sit between the proposed recreation ground and the care home, and the application site itself is overlooked by housing located on Graham Crescent, providing surveillance of the recreation ground and the footpath which runs along the back of the cricket pavilion and connects to the other sports fields and the path around Forfar Loch located further to the north. This is a pictometry image to give you a bit more context of the site. So as you can see, the location of the care home to the north, the line of trees between where the shipping container would be, housing on Graham Crescent, which would provide surveillance of the recreation ground and the proposed storage container. The storage container will be sited in the approximate position of the red arrow, seen against the back blank elevation of the cricket club. At the bottom of the slide, we have the elevations of the storage container. It's what you would expect. It is approximately 15 square metres in area and around 2.5 metres in height, and I understand it would be coloured blue. So the last image is taken from Graham Crescent. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at the back of the cricket pavilion. We have the care home in the background, the line of trees which provide some landscape backclothing. So from the public realm, the container will be seen against the blank back of the cricket club and the existing planting within or on the site boundary. The proposed container will be the other side of the tree, and we're satisfied that the planning conditions could be used to microsite the container such that it wouldn't impact on that tree. So in terms of the development plan position, the policy position seeks to support the function of open spaces, but it allows for development which would not compromise the ability of open spaces to be used for the function with which they intended. The applicant proposes to site this in a part of the recreation ground which is not of any significant value and would not undermine the ability for people to use the play area to the east or the football pitch to the east. Both Sports Scotland and Angus Council Park Service has offered no objection. The Park Service has some control over the use of this land as landowner, and Sports Scotland has indicated a storage container to be used for Forfar Stingers Para Football Club is consistent with the open space use of the site. There are 2 objections to the application which raise matters relating to parking, visual impact and loss of surveillance, but as indicated in the report, we do not consider these are particularly significant issues that cannot be addressed. Conditions are proposed on this application which relate, as I said, to micrositing and requiring the container to be removed at the end of its functional use. It's understood that this is likely to be sited for a relatively temporary period. It's understood that the football club has greater ambitions to relocate to other areas within Forfar, but as I say, we have both a planning condition that requires the container to be removed at the end of its useful life, and as the landowner, we also have an additional control. But in terms of the development plan position, the proposal is considered to be consistent with development plan policy, and there aren't any material considerations, in the opinion of officers, that would warrant refusal of planning permission.
Thanks, Mr Taylor. Just before we go to any questions of the officer, just to reiterate to committee that the planning application was only in front of us today as a result of the land it pertains to be in the ownership of Angus Council, and that's just for complete transparency, because there are only 2 objections that wouldn't have come to this committee. But regardless of that, have any members got any questions of Mr Taylor? Councillor Beattie.
Thanks, Convener. Mr Taylor, one of the things that comes up quite a lot actually with planning applications, and it's come up here in one of the objections, is the neighbour notification regulations. Can you maybe just explain that so people understand where it comes from and why it seems so small when perhaps other properties are actually affected as well?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Beattie. I'll go through it. I just wanted to just check something quickly in the report. So the planning regulations require the notification of all premises within neighbouring land of an application site, and neighbouring land is defined in the Act as land within 20 metres of the application site. So you can end up in a situation with some applications where you have an application site, let's say in the middle of a field, and the nearest neighbour is 40 or 50 metres away. In that circumstance, the regulations would not require those premises to be notified. But in a lot of circumstances, the applications require to be advertised in the newspaper, and that's a different means by which you can effectively bring the application to the attention of the wider public. Hopefully that answers your question sufficiently.
Yep, thanks. I mean, it was just really to point people at the Town and County Planning Development Management Procedure regulations, and I think it's Regulation 18. It's useful for folk to know where that comes from, I think.
Thanks, Councillor Beattie. Any other questions? No, we'll come to comments in a second. Any other questions for Mr Taylor? No, go straight to comments then. Mr McLaren, Councillor McLaren, you can kick off.
Thank you, Convener. I fully support this application for the siting of a storage container at the recreation ground at Graham Crescent. There are no material considerations that justify refusal. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McClark. Councillor Clark, please.
Well, just like my colleague there, my Lord colleague, this area, this recreational area, is well used by all sorts. Community groups, cricket there, and rugby and all sorts. Now, this particular group really going to do some splendid work there now. I know that's not material consideration, but they're not doing anything here that's going to spoil anything. There's already community benefit going on there with buildings therein. So for me, this is absolutely a no-brainer for me. Well done to this group.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Comments at all? Councillor Beattie?
Yeah, I think the temporary nature of this really sort of says everything. It's not going to be there forever. It's not a permanent fixture, and it shouldn't really affect anyone.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments online either. Okay, so, well, in my opinion, containers such as this are fundamental to sports grounds, really, and there are many situated in similar locations all around Angus. Despite the couple of objections submitted, there don't appear to be any material considerations that justify a refusal of planning permission, and accordingly I'm going to move approval, subject to the aforementioned proposed conditions in paragraph 10 of the report. Did I have a seconder? Councillor Clark. Any amendments? No. In that case, planning application number 24/00143 full is hereby approved, subject to the conditions stated. Okay, thank you for your time this morning, folks, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye now.
John, could you stop the live stream, please?